Hello and welcome to another episode on my show, Drawing and Dragons. My name is Alec, your host, and this week I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be talking about bards. And so, before I begin, I want to briefly tell you about some of the different things I'll be talking about just to give you an overview. Some player tips will include how to prepare a list for vicious mockery of great corny insults. Some dungeon master tips will include how to prepare for your bard trying to seduce your villain. And then I'll also be talking about world building tips, like how to move more bards into your world and more minstrels and performers and grand stages and even street corners. And then in my homebrew, I'll discuss the idea of temporary buffs that your bard can perform for the party called songs and stories. So first off, when I first heard of bards and came to D&D, I wrote them off immediately as just a support class that wouldn't be fun to play because of just utility and they don't like actually do damage and they can't tank and they're useless, right? But those of you that have played bards know that they can be very proficient, they can be very fun to play, and they can be overall a very good contribution to the team. So make sure that when you come to bards, you don't just immediately write them off as some terrible class that is just support or whatever. I think that's something that probably comes from older editions. It also kind of comes from just other video games and things where there's the support class, and it's usually like no one in general wants to play the support class. No offense to those of you that like playing support classes, but I know in general there's sort of that negative stigma, and I want to kind of erase some of that. That bards can be really interesting characters to play and very fun to roleplay. My next tip is all about actually the role playing, and that is that there is a bit of a cliche or stereotype of what a bard should be. Let me list this off and tell you if this sounds familiar. Most bards are charismatic, lovable assholes obsessed with booze, booty, and booty. They cause trouble, they're chaotic, and they're the most likely to mess with the party's plans, the dungeon master's plans, or be the one making the crazy, crazy plans. If that sounds familiar, then that's because again, that's what most bards are, right? When people play a bard, I'm willing to bet that they probably are close to that concept that I just listed out, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And it can be a very fun part of the campaign. My friend Adam, shout out to Adam, all loved playing bards, and and I've had maybe like 3 or 4 campaigns, and he almost always was playing a bard. There's nothing wrong with playing a bard, but I just want to offer some other ideas. You could potentially play an old woman or man who travels to sell their stories and tell their stories and gather more stories. Potentially play a scholar who is sort of seeking out more information than giving that information out. Like maybe they are trying to encounter every monster and writing up things about them and drawing sketches, and they're trying to create Volo's Guide to Monsters, right? So more of a Volo type of a character. Or maybe they're a news reporter and they're like trying to gather information. And as your group travels, whenever they stop in a city, some of their downtime is they stand on a street corner and give out news to those willing to pay. Another idea is you could play as a sidekick. A lot of people don't anticipate playing a sidekick, right? Everybody wants to be the hero themselves, but I think that something could be really fun about playing more of a sidekick-like character. Honestly, when I was watching the Critical Role campaign, the newest one that's out, when you first see Not and Caleb's dynamic, you start out thinking that Not is kind of like Caleb's sidekick, and obviously that is not true, and Not truly is the mother of the two, but it's kind of interesting to see that dynamic. And there's nothing wrong with playing a sidekick. It could be really fun to have your character supporting someone else, and then maybe that changes when the main character does something that the sidekick doesn't like, and they maybe butt heads about something, or maybe the sidekick finds out that they were truly a hero all along. This could be something like LeFou from Beauty and the Beast. He's always supporting Gaston and loving Gaston, and I think it would be really fun to play. I think if I was going to play a bard, that's probably the type of character I would want to play as. And then another one, you could be more of a Valor Bard or a College of the Swords, where you are more in battles. And so you could be like a WWE fighter, like you're highly skilled in combat, but you use it to perform and do play fighting and make money that way and please the crowd in that way. So maybe that's the kind of spin you want it. Like you know how to fight, but you just that's not what you choose to use those skills for. Kind of like a WWE wrestler. All right, next player tip. Describe your magic. So if you cast a spell that is healing, will the music you play sound different than a hurting spell, right? So if you cast something like Vicious Mockery or Tasha's Hideous Laughter, like how will that music sound different? And how can you better describe that? And you don't have to obviously perform the song. If you really want, I guess you could get like an audio board and like play a quick like 5 second clip of whatever song you want to reference. And I imagine that could be really fun to like even like toss in like modern music like hip hop or something like or rap. Like that could be pretty silly. But there are different ways you could definitely describe your magic further out and make it a little bit more interesting than just I cast Cure Wounds. And then finally, my tip to you players is to have a list of insults ready to go. I would have like a couple, I would probably sort them in categories because that's just who I am. But I would sort into categories of like what type of insult, like you want to insult someone based on their weight, based on their height, based on their race, based on their gender, based on their whatever else. Like maybe you want to insult the human for this reason or that reason. And obviously, it depends a lot on the culture of the game and the culture of the society that your dungeon master has built, right? So it depends a lot on that. Because if you're in an all like elven society and there's this human and they're like the villain and you're again cast vicious mockery, you could maybe insult them for being a human, right? So try to think about different ways you could just like make a list ahead of time and make them really fun. I think the more corny, the better, but that's just me. Shout out to Josh though, my friend Josh. He can whip out those insults like nothing, and sometimes it's like he's grasping at straws, but usually they're pretty funny and there's a lot of puns and it's pretty good stuff. I would say Josh is a master of puns. All right, Dungeon Master tips. So you Dungeon Masters, first thing first, bards are gonna ruin your plans. I would say, and again, this is a cliche, right? But I feel like the type of players that play bards, or when a player decides they're gonna play a bard, there's sort of the assumption that they're going to probably be a bit more of a troublemaker. Now, I'm not saying that is always true, but it kind of lends to, the truth that, at least from my experience of the bards, and by bards I mean one, Adam. It lends to that experience that bards are usually there to kind of mess with your plans, push the boundaries of what is allowed in your world, what are the consequences for actions. So my thing would be to consider, if you have a bard in the party, to consider how will guards react if A is happening, like they are shirtless running through the street. How they react if B is happening, like they're doing this crazy wicked performance juggling a bunch of bacon or something, right? You need to consider uh, how your guards and how the people of your world might react to such an odd character, because I feel like bards are usually the ones to get into trouble. Also in that mind is consider what a seduction check is. Now I'm not saying bards are the only one to do this, but I do want to bring it up. It's something that probably happens in sillier games, but could possibly happen in a more serious campaign if you need to seduce a noble or seduce a criminal or something, and you are trying to get on their good side. You're trying to gain more information. We actually saw this. I'm going to reference Critical Role again. We saw this in the campaign when Ford had to seduce a pretty critical character in order to gain their trust and get on their side. So consider, what is a seduction check? Is it something that just a player would role play out? Or is it something where they would roll? Personally, I use a performance check. I like to think that the performance skill is you're putting on an act, putting on a show. You are trying and putting effort into the way you convey yourself. And so for me, that speaks performance and that speaks charisma. But for you, it might be something different. Maybe it's a persuasion check. Maybe it's a deception check. And it might depend on the situation. Which check you want to use. And then finally, my last DM tip to you Dungeon Masters who have bards is to really spend some time to build the culture of the world, right? Because bards are all about music and culture and performance. So how does that look in your setting? And this I'll be talking a lot more in the homebrew and the world building section, but just begin to consider, what is the culture of your world like? Do they have festivals? Are they a very expressive culture, lots of color and lots of pop and lots of big gestures and things? Or are they a very demure culture where they're much more reserved and everything's a lot more civilized, right? So consider, how do people in your culture express themselves? All right, Dungeon Masters, let's talk about some world building. This is the part that I like the most, probably. So First things first, you need some stages. And by stages, I just mean places where your bard can perform. It's a very common downtime activity for a bard to be able to perform their magical talents or musical talents in order to get some extra money on the side, right? If you have a week of downtime or if you have a few days of downtime, your bard might go to a local tavern and say, hey, I'm a bard. I'm quite talented. They might play them a sample and say, can I perform for the night or two? And the tavern might say, great, you can stay for free, or here's some free food, or they might even actually pay them. And of course, the bards might receive tips based on how well the performance is, right? So consider making some stages. These could be actual stages. These could be just certain taverns that are known for having musical performers. This could be street corners. This could be pretty much anywhere and everywhere, right? I mean, you know bards. They like to do it all over the place. My next tip leads directly from that last one, which is have other bard like characters. They don't have to be actual bards doing magic, but they could be bard like. Maybe they're a minstrel performing on the street corner, they're actors or musicians or opera singers performing on a grand stage. Or maybe they are, like I said, more like a WWE wrestler, like they're a play fighter and they are performing in an arena for the sport of it all, right? So consider where are bards located in your world already, and your players should probably encounter those. And maybe you just do perform a quick little diddle. Maybe you play just a real song. Maybe you just have some music in the background, so that kind of says why does your tavern music suddenly have someone playing if there's no one described, right? So just kind of consider where you want to insert your bard-like characters and show that your world has culture and your world is alive because music and art is truly an expression of life. My last big one for world building is have bards specific quests, and these are kind of musical again in focus, but I don't feel like bards always need to be musical. But uh, for example, maybe there is a specific ritual that requires a song, and in order to do so, they have to perform it at a specific place using a specific instrument, and that is the only way that this thing can happen, right? So there's a puzzle solving there. You could say maybe that the only way to please the king is to perform this song, and your group has to go out and find this old library where they're able to find this ancient poem and they bring it back and they perform it for the king. Or maybe they need to perform for certain characters in order to get closer to them, get more information. Maybe they have to do like a battle of the bands type of a situation, and there's just a prize they win, or maybe it's to get closer to a certain noble because maybe the final performance is they get to perform for the queen or the king of the land, and that way they're able to gain a favor from them or something, right? So consider how you want to make a quest that is surrounding music and surrounding the bard's inherent skills. All right, let's get to homebrew. My first one is weapons and armor and trinkets, right? Magic items. This is something that we always talk about, really, but I want to get more specific to bards because yes, you can make a special rapier that does a thing, or daggers, right? Because those are the weapons they usually use. You could do special light armor that gives them higher protection or allows them to be more acrobatic or things like that. Those are all great, but maybe consider the bard's special items, which is their musical instruments, right? Bards casting focus is usually the tool of their art, and so usually it's like a lute or a flute or something. So maybe you make a special enchanted lute. Maybe it's one that when it's played can put anyone that hears it to sleep. Or maybe there's, and there's more specifics to that, more game balance to that. And maybe it's just that it can cast a sleep spell. And that might be helpful if your bard doesn't have the spell sleep, right? Or you could do, I mean, there are regular magic items that do similar things. Like there's the pipes of the sewers, which allow you to play some pan pipes and call a bunch of sewer rats, right? These are references to real world fairy tales. So just look at real world fairy tales and real world references to where a magic musical instrument was played or someone did something with a musical instrument and it did some magical thing, and that's where you can get a lot of inspiration from, right? Maybe you take some more book inspiration like Name of the Wind, and maybe if they use a certain instrument it can call on aid from a certain creature of a certain type. Maybe you get almost like into the conjuration side of things. So just consider some magical instruments and how they can be special beyond just boost to bard spells. Next one is subclasses. Again, I say this for each one. Consider making some new cool subclasses. There are plenty out there. You could do one that maybe is more like a storyteller focus instead of being all about music and big loud performances. They're a storyteller sort of character, and I imagine they'll be based a lot on knowledge. It might feel like the knowledge and the arcana domains from clerics, right? So there's that kind of option. Another one that I am currently in the process of making and kind of gluing together is a nature themed one. So it's the College of Fauna, and the whole idea is that it's the rhythm of life and animals and things. And so a lot of their stuff, I borrow some features and some spells and ideas from druids and from nature clerics and even from the Oath of the Ancients paladins, right? So drawing in some of those nature themed aspects to create a bard subclass, I think is pretty cool. Another one you could do is you could potentially do something more focused on the constructive arts, right? Maybe like painting or pottery, right? Where your character is creating something and that allows them to do their magic. I don't necessarily know how that would work, and honestly, some people have even made an entire class just based on those. But I think it could potentially be very cool. You maybe could just reflavor the bard's tools, or you could make an entirely different subclass, right? I imagine with the painting one, taking the quest from Oblivion, where there's a guy trapped in his own painting. Imagine if your bard could get like Dimension Door by quickly painting a portal, and then you can walk through it, right? You can make a bard very focused on like conjuration or transmutation magic with that. I think that'd be very cool, actually. All right, my last big tip for the video here, my last homebrew is songs and stories. So, songs and stories. This is sort of a bigger one that I think is very more in depth and might require a little bit more from the Dungeon Master than even some of my other homebrews. Songs and stories, my idea with this is that in real life, we have these classics, these beautiful works of art that are world famous from history. They're performed time and time again, and they, in order to, some of them are rediscovered in ancient tomes and things. When archaeologists go out digging, they might find an ancient poem by someone or whatever. So maybe consider having some songs and stories in your game, and maybe when your bard performs them with a certain instrument or just in general, they gain some sort of special benefit. This could be like a temporary buff. I'm thinking sort of like how the boons work in like in the from the Dungeon Master's Guide. So maybe it's like if they play a certain song of speed, your whole party gains a +1 to initiative for a day, right? Or maybe if they perform the Song of Valor, they are able to have a little bit of extra combat prowess, and maybe that's a little bit extra damage or accuracy in combat. Maybe that's a little bit extra temporary hit points, right? You do want to be careful with this one because they could potentially be quite strong, but I think it could be very interesting, and it creates something that you could potentially quest for. Like maybe your bard has heard a rumor that in this temple, in the deep library there is a specific song that can grant them eternal life or something, or something else to that effect, right? But the idea is you create a quest item. I would treat it probably similar to like how wizards can copy down spells, or they might go hunting for scrolls, right? Or even how if your characters have heard of like a magical item and they want to go get it. It's the same thing as receiving a magic item. While everybody else is getting their big swords and their big plate mail and stuff, your bard has discovered this ancient poem that allows them to turn invisible, right? Or maybe it lets them fly, or maybe it gives the whole party advantage on charisma checks. Okay, the idea is that you're giving a temporary buff. They have to spend downtime to learn it and then perform it. And then, I mean, if you really wanted to limit it, maybe they, after using it, they no longer get it. Or maybe they have to have some sort of certain ingredient in order to make it work, I guess. I'm trying to think of ways of how you could limit this. So please let me know down in the comments, if I was going to make a mechanic like this, how would you think it should be limited so that way it's not over, like just always on? Would it be that the buffs just aren't very strong so that way it's not too game changing if they're always on? Or if they are a little bit stronger, how could we limit it so that way the bard cannot just perform it every day or before every fight, so that way the party isn't always powered up? And maybe it's that they can only have one buff at a time. All in all, though, that is my video on bards. To recap some of the bigger, finer points and things, don't forget that bards don't always have to be the sassy, lovable asshole who just wants booze, booty, and booty. And they can be a lot more different things based on those interesting subclasses. And some ideas is to make sure you have bards in your world and somewhere where the bards can go to perform and learn more music. And some possible homebrew could be special musical instruments that are extra magical and allow them to do extra effects when they perform. Or maybe even you have songs or stories hidden within your world, and when your bard acquires them, they can perform them for a small buff temporarily for your party. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe right over here, okay? And click the bell as well. I know it's like what everybody says to do it, but it takes 2 seconds. And I've been trying to do it better myself as well. And it makes me feel a lot better when I see those likes rolling in and when I see that people have, subscribed and all. So, please make sure to take the time to do that. Otherwise, once again, thank you very much for watching. I'm Alec, your host. This channel is Drawing and Dragons. I'll see you next week, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. I'll be talking about player tips like how to prepare a list of good vicious mockery insults. Jesus.